Sunlight, ice ages, pineal calcification, and racial styles of consciousness. The planet Earth has gone through multiple 20 ice ages in the past 2,000 years. During the Ice Age period, the Northern Hemisphere, North America, Europe, Northern Asia is frozen down to about the 56th degree of latitude, Black Gnostic Studies, 1980. Whereas the Southern Hemisphere, Africa, South America, Southern Asia, Australia receives increased rainfall during this same period. Ocean levels are also lower during ice ages, such that the Mediterranean sea level falls and the water recedes from the Nile Delta, drying delta marsh and swamplands and extending the coastline of the delta region northward. The last ice age, worm glaciation, ended about 10,000 years ago. Cheikh Anta Diop, 1985, has defined the emergence of Caucasoids and Mongoloids from pre-existing black parents. The Grimaldi and Hottentot populations, Twa, present in pre-warm Ice Age Europe. The man born in Africa was necessarily dark-skinned due to the considerable force of ultraviolet radiation in the equatorial belt. As he moved toward the more temperate climates, this man gradually lost his pigmentation by the process of selection and adaptation. It is from this perspective that the appearance of Cro-Magnon man in Europe must be seen. In the Solutrine, he is seen after 20,000 years of adaptation and transformation from the Grimaldi Negroid, where he has found and no prehistorical archaeology has provided any other explanation for his appearance. Bernard Campbell's book, Humankind Emerging, defined the physiological relationships that promoted changes in skin color as a result of African migrations to Europe and glacial cold cycles. When people settled permanently in regions with less sunlight and did not get enough vitamin D, pigment was no longer a protection but a drawback. Vitamin D exists in 4 forms: vitamin D1, 2, 3, and 4. Vitamin D1 and 2 are inactive forms of vitamin that circulate throughout the body in the bloodstream. Holick, 1980, Beeson, 1968. As blood containing vitamin D passes through the dermal dermis layer of skin, light is often able to penetrate the upper epidermal layer of skin, and vitamin D in the dermal blood containing level energizes and converts vitamin D3 and 4. Vitamin D3 and 4, while passing in blood in the intestinal lining, is able to actively transport calcium across cell membranes from the intestine, a lumen, into the blood supply and whole body distribution. However, in Ice Age Europe, there was frequent cloud cover, thick animal skin clothing, and a dark pigmented upper epidermis level caused inadequate amounts of sunlight to reach the deeper dermal layer in order to activate vitamin D. These environmental factors resulted in a reduced ability to retrieve calcium from dietary sources, thereby depleting body calcium levels, and consequently bone deformations, rickets, occurred. There are at least 3 other glands and classes of hormones involved in bone physiology in addition to vitamin D. 1. Parathyroid gland that produces parathyroid hormone. 2. Thyroid parafollicular cells that produce thyrocalcitonin hormone. And 3. Pineal gland that produces serotonin and melatonin. The parathyroid hormone promotes skeletal homeostasis and calcium ion concentration in the extracellular fluid. It pushes calcium into the bone for absorption and incorporation of calcium in bone growth. Thyrocalcitonin does the reverse. It pulls calcium out of the bone structure, thereby raising the calcium level in the extracellular fluid, including blood levels of calcium ion concentration. Interestingly, the pineal gland controls both the parathyroid and thyrocalcitonin. For in examples where the pineal gland was removed in laboratory animal experimentation, pinealectomy resulted in hyperplasia of the parafollicular cells of the thyroid and hypofunction of the parathyroid, all of which could be restored to normal by the administration of the pineal hormone melatonin. Daramola, 1972. There appears to exist an even more profound relationship of calcium to the pineal gland. Calcium in the form of hydroxylapatite or bone formation is found in the structure of the pineal gland, from small particles the size of fine sand grains to large solid nuggets that are actually visible upon physical inspection of the pineal post-mortem or in skull x-rays. Pilling, 1977, Earl, 1965, Mabel, 1974. When the pineal gland is heavily infiltrated with large amounts of calcium, pineal calcification, Though remaining pineal tissue continues to manufacture and release melatonin, it does so in greatly reduced amounts. People with a non-calcified pineal gland will usually possess a blood serum level of about 70 nrem. However, people with a calcified pineal gland will experience a 50% decrease in blood serum levels, such that they average melatonin levels of about 35 nrem. Pelham, 1973. There are racial differences in pineal calcification that broadly parallel the intensity of skin pigmentation. The darker the skin pigmentation, the lower the incidence of pineal calcification. Thus, adult Black African populations in Africa and North America have recorded pineal calcification incidence rates of 5 to 15%, Daramola, 1972, Adeloy, 1974. Whereas European populations in Europe and North America experience pineal calcification incidence rates of 60%, 80% in adult population. Nafsker, 1925, Dyke, 1930, Vastine, 1927. Asian populations in India, Japan, and China experience pineal calcification incidence rates of 15 to 25%. Thus, for African populations that remained in the Ice Age Europe, there is not only a decrease in skin pigmentation, but also a decrease in pineal hormone output of the hormone melatonin. On a biological and physiological level, this change played a profound contributory role in the change of consciousness from the spirit-focused matriarchal African to the material-focused patriarchal European African. Perhaps with only one half of the melatonin key to unlock the locus coeruleus doorway to neuromelanin, all black amenta, inner vision, many European Africans with pineal calcification had access to only surface levels of the unconscious, thus perpetually clinging to surface forms of things, such as materialism, their only real reality. Nairn Akbar's notion of the European African rejection of ancient African spiritual concepts as uncivilized is correct, evidenced by the European African Sigmund Freud's statement to C.G. Jung in the reference to the latter's interest in deeper levels of the unconscious. I can still recall vividly how Freud said to me, "My dear Lung, promise me never to abandon the sexual theory. That is the most essential thing of all. You see, we must make a dogma of it, unshakable bulwark. And promise me this one thing, my dear son, promise that you will go to church every Sunday." In some astonishment, I asked him, "Bulwark against what?" To which he replied, "Against the black tide of mud." And here he hesitated for a moment, then added, "Of occultism." Sulloway, 1979. Furthermore, Lung commented on Freud's attitudes at this time, 1907 to 1910. Above all, Freud's attitude toward the spirit seemed to me highly questionable. Wherever, in person or in a work of art, an expression of spirituality, in the intellectual, not the supernatural sense, came to light, he suspected it, and insinuated that it was repressed sexuality. Anything that could not be directly interpreted as sexuality he referred to as psychosexuality. Sulloway, 1979, Lung, 1963. C.G. Jung, another European African psychiatrist, though more in touch with deeper levels of the unconscious, was still troubled as evidenced by his own reports. I was not to recognize the real nature of this disturbance until some years later, when I stayed in tropical Africa. It had been, in fact, the first hint of going back under the skin, a spiritual peril which threatens the uprooted European in Africa today to an extent not fully appreciated. On an aged rock above us, a slim, brownish-black figure stood motionless, leaning on a sling spear, looking down at the train. I was enchanted by this sight. It was a picture of something utterly alien and outside my experience, but on the other hand, a most intense sentiment, déjà vu. I had the feeling that had already experienced this moment, and had always known this world was separated from us only by distance and time. It was as if I were at this moment returning to the land of my youth, and as if one knew that dark-skinned man who had been waiting for me for 5,000 years. The healing tone of this curious experience accompanied me throughout my whole journey through savage Africa. I can recall only one other such recognition of the immemorially known. Where danger is, there is salvation also. These words of Holder often came to my mind in such situations. The salvation lies in our ability to bring the unconscious urges to consciousness. At the sight of the solitary dark hunter, one knew only that his world had been mine for countless millennia.